Okay, do we have some questions in the room?
Tech problems. All right, well, while we're waiting for that.
It's Chris Miles.
Hey, Chris.
Yes, Chris.
I can start us off with something that Toby and I were just talking about in the breakout room, and hopefully he can chime in too. But he was talking about the importance of checking your lower control arms, because being that they're so old now, there are some weak points on the original arm. This is a stainless steel one that I happen to have that I haven't installed yet. But about 10 years ago, give or take, I had a crack and a break on my lower control arm happening right here. The whole nose of the front lower ball joint section had become disconnected and it started flaring up. At that point, I figured that it was time that I needed something a bit better. And I decided to go with some newly manufactured control arms. A lot of people are boxing in the lower section, and that is also good, but that does not protect the front nose, which has that issue of breaking. And basically, I guess what happens is we get cracking and then rust sets in, and then just a failure over time. But if anyone else has anything to add on that, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris. That was very good information.
Okay, I think the first person with their hand up was Scott Mueller from Texas. Go ahead, Scott, bring us a problem.
Well, I've been out of the community for about 15 years. Used to show regularly and go to the car shows. And we got busy with life and parked the car, and it hasn't been driven since. So the thing that I'm looking for advice on is recommissioning the vehicle and getting it back on the road. Where would you all start?
Well, the first thing you got to do is clean out the gas tank. There's no doubt that you have old fuel and varnish in your gas tank. And if you don't get rid of that, the stuff will get sucked under your fuel injection and you'll have a major problem. Whatever you do, do not try to start the car, because the varnish in the system will screw up your fuel injection. So what I generally recommend is pulling the tank, because you've got to get it thoroughly clean. You'll probably find that a number of the rubber components on the fuel pickup system have also rotted or decayed. So you can plan on having to fix some of those. Question has come up over the years: can you flush out the fuel system? Which is a good idea, but it's complicated. So I don't know if you maintain your car, if you're working on your car, or do you have with other people. But if you have the expertise to flush out some of the fuel system, that would be a good idea. The other thing you should be prepared for is it's likely that some of your fuel injectors, which are pitot valves and electronic, that's one or more of them will have corroded and stopped working. So when you start the car, eventually you'll find 2 or 3 cylinders, or 1 or 2 cylinders, if you're lucky, that are misfiring. It's most likely injectors failed. Mm-hmm. I've had people try to resurrect them, and they've had marginal success, but just be prepared for that. The other thing, of course, which is common sense, your oil is 15 years old, and you should change that also before starting up the car, and the filter. I always recommend Mobil 1. I've been using it for 25, 30 years now, and have torn down a number of engines after 100,000 miles, and they virtually look brand new. The other thing that you might want to consider is the fuel reservoir. Sometimes those go bad, sometimes they don't go bad. You'll know if you have hot starting problems once you get it running. The last thing, of course, is the cooling system. Depending upon the quality of the coolant that was in there, it may be okay, it may not. Some people recommend to flush the system and start it all over again. It's not a bad idea. The chemistry of ethylene glycol and polyethylene glycol coolants have changed. The additive packages that are available now are much more amenable to aluminum components, which the DeLorean has. And it's a risk factor that if the coolant was not all that good and there was a lot of water in there and a lot of water had high iron content in that, you can pretty well know from where you are, it could have caused local corrosion spots on the aluminum. If you haven't got leaks, that's okay, but be aware that you can have some local corrosion occurring on systems that have been not circulating for a while and the additive package has basically been used up.
Okay.
All right,
I
thanks.
think that's a good answer to that question. I think our next one is Ken Keplinger. Go ahead, Ken.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Oh, guys, I appreciate you putting this on for us. I'm really really kind of a newbie to the DeLorean. I've had it for about 4 or 5 years now. It's a great car, and I've done a lot of work on it. But I've got 2 questions for you. The first one, I've do a few car shows, not a whole lot, but the other day, I'm here in Arkansas, and it gets kind of warm, and I had a hard time starting it, and it's the first time I've ever had that problem before, and finally it started up, and I thought, well, maybe I've heard these the problems with that, but then last night it got kind of cool, and I had a hard time starting there again too. I always run premium gas with no ethanol in it or anything like that. It's all alcohol free. So I don't know if there might be something that might be a problem. That's my first question. The second question is, I've got looking at the code of my tires, and they're pretty old, probably 10 or 15 years old now. And I'm looking for tires and what brand I should look at. Any help that you give me, I'd appreciate it.
I have some ideas for you, Ken. If you're having a hot start problem, typically what can go bad is this part. This is called the fuel accumulator. It's essentially has a spring in it, and it holds fuel pressure when the engine isn't running. And over time, the rubber inside can deteriorate, and that pressure will start to relieve itself much faster than it should. This is under the center of the car in the frame. It's kind of tricky to get to, but this can solve many of those problems that happen once these fail. And when you turn your car off, the fuel system starts to bleed pressure off way too quickly, and the fuel injection can't keep up with that. So that could be one issue that you're having. Another part, you were saying you had a cold start problem, and I don't have one of these sensors on hand right now, but there is a sensor located in the water pump that reads coolant temperature. And normally that sensor will fire off the cold start injector when the car is cold, so that the car will start easier. If that sensor is bad, then your cold start injector is not firing, and you won't be getting that extra fuel at startup. So these things might be what you're facing right now. They are the common things that go wrong. The thermotime switch, as it's called, it's the sensor in the water pump. Those tend to go bad. It's called
What
a
was that again?
thermotime
What was the name of that?
switch. I didn't make up these names. They're all old technical Bosch things. The other one was called the fuel accumulator. Do you know, or do you have any service records with your car that you'd be able to determine any of this?
I've got a few, and I don't think that those have ever been touched. Just I've had the car for about 5 years now, and I haven't really had a whole lot of problem when I first got. Well, I shouldn't say that. When I first got it, the timing was terrible. To find out that they had it, whoever was with it before had the distributor 180 degrees out.
Oh.
Well, so two of the cylinders were firing okay, 2 of them were advanced and 2 of them were retracted. So I had a heck of a time trying to figure that one out, and finally we set it, and it works fine now. So, but yeah, I'll give that a try. Fuel accumulators, or you say they're Bosch?
They're Bosch. You can get it on Rock Auto. They're about $100.
Okay.
And it's a good time at that point to inspect the rubber fuel hoses that are connected to it, because if it's never been replaced or hasn't been replaced, the rubber fuel hoses start to deteriorate. The original hoses had a black rubber coating, which usually like flakes off, and they reveal a white kind of mesh layer. And then there's actually a hard like plastic or nylon kind of inner tubing that actually is what's holding the fuel pressure in. But those original hoses will start to deteriorate. And if you're going to change the accumulator, you should just change the hoses as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's like changing the clutch without changing the pressure plate. Yeah.
Your accumulator is probably green like this one. There have been versions in the past that were sold that were physically smaller in length, and that might indicate that it was replaced. The current Bosch model is silver, so I happen to just have an older one, but I mean this is new, but I haven't used it yet. So that's how you can see if it's been replaced. If it looks smaller, or if it's not green, then it's probably been replaced, but most likely it hasn't.
Okay, well, I'll check that out.
It really helps. You can do it on jack stands, but it's just really tight quarter.
Yeah, I'll put it on a lift and do it the right way. And if I got to change, if I got to change it, I normally try to do things right. So I'll change the fuel lines too if I need to. You said now that the thermal switch, I'm not for sure exactly where is that anyway.
So if you go to the back of the engine and you look for the thermostat cover on the water pump.
Hey Chris, it's Mark.
Okay.
Yes.
I got my water pump here.
Oh, good, perfect.
And this is the thermostat cover on the top, and then this is the thermal time switch right here on the side that bolts into this brass adapter. So when you're looking at the engine, it's just to the left here of the top of the water pump.
How do you test switch?
There's a test procedure for it in the technical manual. When it's cold, you just put a resistance check with a ohm meter, and you get a value off of it when it's cold and a value off of it when it's hot. And if it's within spec, then it should be fine.
Okay. I'll find that out. Thank you.
Now,
Moving on. How about the tires? Does anybody know anything about the tires?
Yeah, somebody put some information in the chat.
Corey, do you want to read your comment?
Sure. First off, definitely good on you for looking for new tires at this point, because 10 to 15 years is definitely stretching it. Don't want to see anything happen to you or your vehicle. For a number of years, we were kind of in the wilderness. As tires have gotten bigger on everything, just nobody was making a set of tires for our cars. A lot of people, and even the DMC facilities, were substituting the rears for 225s instead of 235s. So you were losing a little bit of width and a little bit of height and rolling circumference. I asked Dave Swingle about that once, and he said it was really kind of the difference between a brand new set of tires and a worn out set of tires when it comes to rolling circumference. It just, I always thought that, you know, if a vehicle has a certain set of tires, I should have that set of tires, or that size, not anything smaller. So there's fairly recently been a new development. Hankook has come out with a new set of tires, the Synergy ST. And I think you can get them available both sizes at Tire Rack. I'm not totally sure because I have to source differently or pay stupid money for shipping. But those, I need to replace mine next year, and that's probably what I'm going to go to, just because I like the idea of having a matching set. I like knowing that my front and rear tires are going to handle the same way, react to different things in the same way. And I like having that original size. And right under me, Nathan Gill is out here somewhere, who says that they just put them on and they're very happy with them.
Oh,
So,
great. Well, that's what I'll get. That's what I'll
Yeah.
get then.
That's my recommendation.
Okay. Well, thank
I just put on the Hankook's Kinergy STs on my car. My tires, mine's a daily driver with 245,000 miles on it. So,
All right, Toby.
yeah. So what I did is I went with the 245s in the rear, just because I had never done that before. So I got 245s in the rear and then the 195s in the front. I really like these tires. They seem to behave quite well in the wet, which in the Northwest is important. And there was a little bit of a handling change going to the 245s because they're a little bit larger tire, a little bit fluffier sidewall, so to speak. But for my aggressive driving style, you know, I had to kind of get used to the larger tires. They just feel a little bit different in high-speed turns. But for general getting around, they seem to be really good.
Well, good. All
Yeah,
right,
I like these taller tires because it makes the car about a ½ inch higher and it's easier to get in and out of.
I think we have some other questions building up here. Let's go with the next person in line here, Anthony Zamfodi. Go ahead and ask your tech question.
All right. Hey, guys. Okay, so this is a question. I've taken it to DMC Midwest. So I have an early VIN, 1235. Ever since I got the car, when I turn left, I'll hear a clunk near the rear right wheel. And if I turn the same direction again, I won't hear it. But if I go the opposite direction, I'll hear that same clunk. Now, Mike at Midwest told me that it's possible I need some kind of a shim in the hub carrier, or that the hub carrier was just a bad mold, whatever, and that there's a handful of these DeLoreans that this happens with. I've looked on DMC Talk, a lot of forums. Some of them say it's the famous DeLorean clunk. So I hate to think that this is not fixable. I was told that it's not a bad thing to just kind of live with it and stuff. The other thing was when I did bring it in, when I bought the car a year ago, I did have the Econo tabs replaced, had those installed and everything. He had found when I brought it back about a month ago, he says, well, just put it on the rack. Let's take a look real quick. He found the right side nut on the tab actually a little loose by about 3/4 of a turn. Now, I don't know if that could be. So my question is, does anybody know about these shims or where I could acquire them? I was told the late Don Steger had shim kits. And the other thing is there any ideas what else on that site it could be?
So you're talking shim kits for the bearings in the hub carrier?
Correct. I was told that Don Steger used to make a kit, like little shims that you could put in there, because apparently I guess where the bearing actually itself is kind of slightly moving back and forth, just like but it's a pretty significant clunk. I mean, I can feel it. And it does worry me, but I can't see nothing. I've even put a camera underneath to watch everything. I can't see nothing moving down there.
That the bearing is essentially a press fit in the hub carrier, and then it's retained with a circlip. And I've never really seen those, dancing around in there unless the hub carrier itself is cracked. I remember one car where there was a large crack in the bore, and so the bearing was loose. But you shouldn't be getting that much of a movement in the bearing to where you'd actually feel it.
Okay.
There could be something along the lines of maybe one of the CV joints is becoming loose, and you're getting a little bit of dance that way. Or, the fact that one of your tabs was coming loose, that's telling. You have to make sure that doesn't happen, because as soon as those tabs come loose, you start getting, that's where you start getting the bending, and then things go downhill pretty quickly from there.
Toby, if that nut is loose, would that cause that hole where the bolt goes through to round out a little bit? Could that end up causing a little bit of a play? Is that something to kind of look at too, maybe? Or
yeah, if the tab is loose, you're gonna wind up with that bolt kind of rocking back and forth, so to speak, and that can hog out the hole, the bore through the trailing arm itself. You probably won't have any damage to the sleeve and the bushing because it's going to be moving around in the rubber pretty well.
Hey, Toby, a follow-up comment to that. So could it also be maybe that the main axle nut is not torqued properly and that the bearing is starting to come apart? So not the outer housing in the carrier, but the bearing assembly on the drive shaft. Could that be moving on him?
The bearing assembly on the drive shaft.
Well, you got the shorty stubby shaft that goes through the bearing, right? That the CV axle attaches to and the hub on the other side. So could the hub be moving in the bearing if the axle nut wasn't tight enough?
Boy, I hope not.
Yeah, me too.
On the left-hand side, if that starts to come loose, it'll unwind itself pretty quickly. Oliver's floating around in the grid someplace. He's pretty familiar with that. He lost a wheel on a highway in Greece. But if one of those big nuts is coming loose, the 108514s, if they're coming loose, yeah, that can create some interesting stuff. But that becomes a flight safety issue there for sure.
So what Mike in Midwest, so his words were, and also Dave Swingle was out. He also told me the same thing. He said it appears a lot in early VINs with the hub carrier, and he said it's sometimes a little space between the circlip and the bearing itself, so that somehow that circle, they're not flush with each other and there's just a little bit of space. So I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It sounds like you haven't. No. They made it sound like it was something typical, but I feel like that's something I should be able to fix. So I don't want to live with that.
Hey, Tony, let me ask you a question here. Have you taken the car and put that tire up in the air so it's not sprung with any weight, and see if there's any play in the whole carrier, trailing arm, the way the tire actually either is stationary or rocks back and forth? Have you tested it physically to see if it moves at all?
So I did do a preliminary check. I need to go back and be more thorough. I did jack it up, couldn't find any play in it. It was pretty solid, actually. I mean, I couldn't really move anything. No control arm, nothing. However, when I did put the tire,
when you jacked it up, how did you support it?
I had it jacked up underneath the rear cross member.
Okay, so the tire was hanging in the air.
Correct. So another thing, my car is very low and it does have kind of a pretty significant camber coming out. And I know when you lower a car, it causes the wheels to kind of, camber out. I didn't know if that was starting to cause some wear and tear on the bearings or whatever. Everything seems solid. Now, I even took the tire off. When I put the tire back on, I kind of just snugged up the lug nuts and put it back down. When I went to tighten the lug nut, the wheel still wasn't completely full, weight was down. So it was able to kind of just move a little bit. I heard it went clunk, but then that was it. So when the wheel kind of slightly moved. Another time when I jacked it back down, and the tires kind of went back out, I could hear it kind of clunk. Very, very lightly. So.
Well, that's the key to figuring out what the problem is. even, the tire makes it difficult because you can't see what's going on. If you put together some rig to artificially load the axle, like if you could screw a crowbar on or something like that, that might give you a hint of where the problem lies.
Okay. Yeah, I plan on upgrading the suspension. It's got the original shocks. It does have some modified springs to make it that low. Can't figure out where they came from. So like I said, it's a lot lower. I did get DPI's adjustable lower control arms to get installed to kind of fix that camber on the tires. But yeah, I need to get in there and thoroughly check it out. I just didn't know if anyone may have heard, just through historically like that being a.
I mean, over the years with other cars, I experienced a clunking sound due to a loose shock absorber. I doubt if that's the issue, but I can tell you I've had experience with clunks from loose shock absorbers.
Yeah, and it's only when I turn, like one time, if I go left,
right,
you
right.
hear it. So yeah, and then
Yeah.
okay. The
Okay.
search continues.
Any
then.
other
Thank you.
thoughts? Any other thoughts for Tony on that?
I dropped in the chat that my car did exactly the same thing, and Mike looked at it and it doesn't do it anymore, but I don't know if he fixed something. I have no memory of that. But when did you talk to Mike? If it was after mine, I'm surprised he didn't remember that.
All right.
Just like a few weeks ago.
Oh,
Looks
yeah.
like Ryan Foster has a solution. He has indicated that with the green yes. So Ryan, take it away.
Don't know how true this is, but that particular sound that you're hearing, Anthony, I've heard that corrosion can happen between the hub carrier and the bearing. And when there's corrosion in there, the bearing actually can move slightly in there. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I've heard from actually Stephen Wynn told me that a while ago. And he said typically the fix is to put a new bearing in.
Okay. That which is in the works. That's something I'm going to do too anyway. So maybe hopefully just trial and error. I don't want to like just try to part fix and buy all kinds of parts, but thanks. No, I appreciate that. I'll look into that for sure.
Okay. Thank you so much,
We have
Tony.
time for one more question.
We have another 26 minutes. We have lots of time.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
I wanted to jump in there. I've got an emerging problem called a rattling shift linkage. When I get into second gear and get in the 4,000 RPM, 4,500 RPM range, the linkage starts rattling. And then when I shift to the lower RPM of third gear, it goes away, but then it comes back in third gear. When I get to fourth gear, it doesn't come up at all, or fifth. So I'm wondering, is that something that's easily fixed at home? Is that something to be worried about? It's annoying because it sounds like the car is coming apart.
The shift linkage has in each end of each rod, there's a rubber bushing and then a couple of plastic sleeves. Have you ever renewed the rubber bushing portions?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, that might be a good first place to start.
Okay.
As the rubber bushings start to fail, part number is 10755 if memory serves. You'll start getting sloppier shifting as well. So the shifting will start to get sloppier, and then you'll start getting vibrations because the rods are not really anchored all that well on the pivot bolts. And so on each end of both shift rods, there's a rubber bushing and then two plastic sleeves.
So the plastic things wear out also, or not likely?
Not likely. If the joint is really beat up, then you can have issues with the plastic sleeves too. But it's generally the rubber that gives up, and it's normally going to be in the rearward most shift rod, so between the bell crank and the transmission itself.
Thank you. Is that something that can be done by the home mechanic?
Oh yes, easily.
Great. I'll order the parts and start tackling it.
Very good. Okay, it looks like Colin Scott has had his hand up for a while. Colin, are you ready to ask a question?
Yeah. Just this last year, I took my car out of storage. I went to go fill the tank, and Now it just points north on the fuel gauge.
Ooh.
I do have the Tankzilla, so I know it's not totally stock. I'm just wondering if I just have to get in there, clean contacts, or if I just need to get a new bypass unit or something in there, anything to make it work.
I've heard that the Tankzilla requires an incandescent bulb in the battery or in the fuel light. Did you ever change that?
I have not changed any of the internal lights in the dash or anything like that. I've only updated the door lights.
That may be something to check, but also corrosion. But
Yeah, I figured. I've got a bunch. I work electronics, so I have deoxit and cleaning brushes and anything else I need to work with it. It's just I wanted to make sure so I didn't have the car half disassembled, after car show season's over, whatever's left of it. Just want to make sure I'm not sitting there, have the car apart for months on end, just trying to figure out where this little gremlin is.
Well, it's a simple test. You simply take the fuel level sensor out and have somebody on inside watching the fuel gauge, and you move the float up and down. And if the gauge works, then it's a connection problem. If the gauge doesn't work, then the sensor's gone bad.
All right. All right, I have to give those a try. Thank you.
Okay, looks like Roland is next. He has his hand up. Roland, what's your question?
Hello, thank you very much, Ryan. Appreciate it. And I've owned 4516 now for just 7 years, but been in the family for 38 and been taking care of my dad's car. Been doing a lot of upgrades on D, and this year I did replace my fuel lines. Interesting note, when I had all my fuel lines replaced, one thing I'm noticing on the what it looks like is coming from the passenger side area, and I think it's on the other side of the firewall, I'm having a buzzing sound. It's about 40, maybe 50 dB loud, and this happens on cold start. And so when I start the car cold, you hear this buzz sound. Interesting note, how the sometimes you get the chasing action. And when it drops below 500, the buzzing stops. But when the RPM jumps up to almost 1,000, then the buzz comes back. Interesting note, as I'm driving the car, after about maybe 5 minutes, the buzz goes away. And I'm like, where's the buzz coming from? I don't know if it's coming from the frequency valve since all the fuel lines got replaced. I've been trying to chase this gremlin. Yeah. And that's the question.
Frequency valve is supposed to buzz. Maybe your idle speed motor is buzzing more than it did for some reason. Have you noticed any performance problems with the car?
No performance problems at all. Just noticing it was a buzzing sound. It was coming from the passenger side area. First thing I checked was, take the carpet off from the, compartment, the relay compartment, because I thought it'd be a bad relay. But no, there's no noise coming in from the relay box. So, and that was my first thought, was maybe with the new hoses, maybe the frequency valve is just more pronounced, or could be the idle motor too.
Did they take your frequency valve out and crimp the new line directly on it?
They did, yes.
I don't know if this makes any sense, but the original lines have that big rubber sleeve over it. And I think the new one doesn't. So maybe that was muffling the buzz somehow. I don't know. It could be.
Yeah,
you know what? That is a very valid thought, because as you all know, the original lines were like an insulator, and it's like a insulator. And maybe because then I went to stainless steel, and it's probably just like you said. I think it's probably it's probably a little more pronounced. But it's interesting because the buzz does go away after about running the car for about 5 minutes, and then of course beyond. So other than that, no performance issues whatsoever.
Well, again, it's an easy test. Just get a piece of hose, split it in half, cover it, and see if the problem is muted. It won't go away, but it'll be muted.
Very good, Bob. Thank you.
I know a lot of people diagnosing noises have a earpiece thing with like a metal tip that they touch around different areas, and it you can kind of localize where sounds are coming from. I'm sure you have to be careful about, where you stick it, but I have seen those used to isolate noise sources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a stethoscope. You put it on
Like
your
a
ears and
stethoscope,
Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, it's exactly like that.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like a stethoscope, but instead of a rubber tube, it's actually like a metal pokey thing.
I've actually
Yeah, it's
got one here.
Yeah, it's a mechanic stethoscope. And there's other guys who basically take a 2-inch long metal rod and just stick that by their ear, and it accomplishes the same thing. But mechanic stethoscopes look a lot like a really cool tool.
I think Mark said he has one there.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
I have a question. I've heard people talk about the fuel lines under the car need to be replaced with steel lines rather than rubber lines or something along those lines. Does anybody tell that story?
Hey, Ryan, why don't you talk about your nylon conversion?
When I installed the new style fuel pump, instead of using the rubber lines that came with it, I got some nylon fuel line. It was a recommendation from somebody on DMC Talk. Can't remember who exactly it was, but he gave me the part numbers or Dorman part numbers. I changed one of the fittings, the return line fitting, to a 90-degree angle because that one's straight for whatever reason. So they're both 90-degree angles. I put the nylon fuel line in there, and you can heat it up and actually use a brake flare tool to hold the line and press it right over the barbed ends, and it'll be secure, and you won't have to worry about the rubber deteriorating from the fuels from today, the ethanol fuels and everything. I've been running it that way for 2 years and haven't had a single issue with it.
That's great. Okay, did Colin, your questions got answered? If so, I think Dennis Adams has his hand up.
I just put that up if we run out of tech questions. I had a couple pictures of a car cap so I could show, but if there's any other tech questions, they should take priority.
Okay, we got one from Mark Woodsma. Mark.
So I got a bit of a follow-up from what Chris Miles introduced us with and control arms. So I have lower control arm here that I just had refinished. This is from VIN 1310, which is behind me here. And I had them boxed. Clint Wolf did the boxing for me on these and then powder coated. The arms were in perfect condition when they came off the car, just rusty. So I bead blasted them and then had them boxed and powder coated by Clint. So now I'm in the process of putting in the new ball joints, and I was originally going to use the originals, but I decided now I got it all apart, and I'm going to put in these new ones that I got from DeLorean Go. These are the UK made ones. I posted this question on Facebook too, and Toby, you commented, so thank you for that. And I wanted to share this with everybody else here as well. When I pressed in I actually tried to press in the original ball joints first. And when I did so, I was left with a gap between where you put the circlip on and the top surface of the control arm here. And that gap concerned me that perhaps the ball joint could come out because it wasn't a snug fit. I've also just wanted to check these out and maybe try them out. I got these stainless filler rings from DeLorean Go, which I think are made by Grady, that fit into the bottom of the control arm here to help take up that space. I'm having a bit of a challenge fitting them on with the powder coat that was done. So does anybody else have any experience having done control arm refurbishment or new ball joints and dealing with that gap?
Yeah, we had the same problem working on the electric DeLorean as well as 4190. And yeah, the gap was an issue, and we just machined up a spacer and put it in there. I'm glad Rob is making them now, but yeah, that was it. It was odd, and I like the ball joints from England. They're more reliable, less likely to fail because there were some issues with that some time ago. But you're right. They're, you know, how they did it, was it 40 years ago now? What was the standard dimension now? And what's the knockoff dimensions? There is a difference.
When the ball joints are pressed into the lower control arm, it stretches that little part of the lower control structure. And I think those rings are actually meant to try and compress that collar down a little bit and restore some of the interference fit between the ball joint and the lower control arm. And with powder coating, yeah, that's a really thick coating, and you run into all kinds of problems with powder coating. When you know it's so.
I got little tiny pieces of sandpaper, and I'm trying to, because it's hard to get in there now with the boxing that was done. So, but I'm trying my best. I got this one pretty good, where I think I should be able to press this ring on from below, and I measured it to make sure it'll seat all the way down as well. The other arm, actually, which is right here, the end part is a bit actually kind of squashed, so the ring doesn't fit at all. I don't know if it got hit or if just the way it was made, but there isn't enough space for the spacer to fit in there. It's a little too fat. So I might have to grind this one down a little bit to get it to fit.
I have a question. There are those white resistors in the back of the engine compartment. Are there any upgrades to more modern components for that? Is that just something we have to deal with, or is there an evolution to that aspect of the design?
Never really thought about it.
Ryan, do you mean the resistor pack that's on the firewall?
Yeah. Is that just is there any benefit to upgrading that to something else, or?
And that's just for the ignition circuit, right? Which when you turn the key, it bypasses the resistors, so you get more voltage to the something like that to the spark plugs. Am I correct there, Toby?
Yeah. So that the resistor pack, it just cuts down the voltage to the coil, so you don't cook the coil basically. And most coils, well, super modern ones can take the higher voltage, but the vintage coils, we'll say, need to have their voltage cut down just a bit. And so, yeah, the resistor pack is there to reduce that voltage, and it's dissipating some of that resistive energy and heat. So you get this really hot resistor pack. It's something could be done, I'm sure, solid state, but I've never really been ambitious enough to figure that one out.
Fascinating. I've always wondered what those were for and what benefit. Now I understand. Cool.
I think it's not a DeLorean thing, Ryan, unique. I'm like, my 1981 Porsche 928 has the same resistor pack design. And actually the 928 uses the exact same ignition coil, I believe.
All right. Well, we've got 9 minutes.
I got one more question, Ryan.
Sure.
Okay. I'm working on trying to replace the remote mirror control switch, and one of the aftermarket parts that's sold is a Ford switch. And I put in one of these on the electric DeLorean probably 15 years ago, and the wiring instructions that came with the switch, there was an error in it, and I eventually tracked it down and fixed it. Now the new switches I have, they don't work at all. I checked all the wiring to the mirrors, everything is good there, and I started checking the logic circuit within the mirror switches, and it's really screwy. Doesn't function. And I'm just curious if anybody has played around with these switches and figured out an exact wiring diagram, what turns on what when you move the switch in what direction, and where should you be getting pluses and minuses and reversals when you go up, down, sideways, whatever. I've taken a switch apart, and I'm working on putting together a diagram of how it's supposed to work, but I'm a little surprised that it wasn't plug and play.
An alternative to taking it apart is see if you have any friends who have access to an X-ray machine, like a veteran, have them run it through. You can actually reverse engineer a lot of the wiring if you take top side and bottom or topside and whatever the third axis is, photos
Yeah.
through X-ray.
Oh, it comes apart real easily. That wasn't the issue. The issue is yeah, you have to reverse the field for up and down because the motors go both directions. And the way it's designed is there's only 3 connections, but you really should have 4. And I'm just wondering if anybody else has replaced these and had no problems, because every one that I've bought over the years, I've always had a problem with it.
Well, I've installed these new style mirror switches. Now I don't know specifically. I was getting them through Texas, of course, when I was a franchise owner. You know, you have to just take the connector off of the original switch and transfer all the wires over. And there was a supplied wiring diagram on which wires go where. I don't know if that's still happening or not, but I've installed those on a number of cars without any issues.
Yeah, I have the wiring diagram. I don't know if you were using the Ford switch, but yeah, I tried that and tested all its outputs, and they're totally screwy.
All right, we got 3 questions left in 7 minutes, so we'll do a lightning round here real quick.
Okay.
All right, Ian Beatty from UK. Go ahead.
Hello, hi from the UK. I've got 2703 here, which came in from North Carolina 5 years ago. It's a follow-up question on the low control arms. I wonder if anybody had any experience of what we call over the aluminium or aluminum billet control arms. Everybody had any thoughts on there? Because I'm looking at upgrading over the winter.
Yeah, I've installed aluminum control arms on 3 cars now, I think. The thing about aluminum control arms is they're much stiffer. So you know, the sheet metal ones, the originals, and then some of the others are somewhat flexible in the grand scheme of things. But the aluminum control arms are very, very stiff. And so when they're being asked to translate up and down while you're driving the car, all of the rotations that normally would occur happen in the bushings rather than in the arm itself. But you know, Oliver Haller has a set of those control arms on his car, and he's got a bazillion miles on them now, and they seem to be doing fine.
Okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
they work well.
Okay, Skip, you have a question, sir. Go ahead, Skip.
Just an answer for Mark. Has anybody tried on those rings to freeze them, to shrink them a little bit before they put them in? And then because you know, material shrinks when you freeze it. We used to have to do that. You freeze it, put it in, and when it warms back up, it fits fine. Was that a thought maybe on that ring that they supply? You ever tried that, Tony? Toby, to freeze them before you put them in?
For that ring, it goes on the outside of the collar of the lower control arm, so you'd want to expand it. So you'd want to
heat it up then. You put it in the oven.
Yeah,
Anyhow, I didn't know if you tried that. I know we used to do that all the time. We'd either heat it or we'd shrink it. If it wouldn't fit, then it would fit in there and be fine.
Yeah, back in my previous lifetime at Boeing, we used to use shrink fit all the time.
Okay, so I just was throwing it out. You know, I'm not familiar with that part, but I know if you either freeze it or heat it, we used to put stuff in the oven, take it out there and put it in, because then it would fit just fine.
Yeah, that might help with these particular collars too, because they're really meant to compress the sheet metal on the lower control arm a little bit to tighten up the fit with the ball joints.
Well, maybe that's an option to heat them up.
Yeah.
So that's
Okay.
what I'm trying to get to him. So thank
All
you.
right. Michael Conrad's had his hand up for a while. Mike, go ahead with your question.
I have air conditioning that's been out, or kind of not working for about 5 years, and probably no pressure for about that long. It's original R12. What's the current most pragmatic solution for fixing an air conditioning if you don't care whether you're upgrading or sticking with R12? And it might not have had pressure on it for a long time.
Well, I'm by no means an air conditioning expert necessarily, but I'm not sure if anybody really is. But if it's been open to the environment at all, it really, you need to replace the receiver dryer, because the desiccant packs inside will have been saturated. You know, you probably want to upgrade to, or change at least to 134, or you could try, you know, one of the drop-in quote unquote replacements, such as Red Tech. And those things like Red Tech, which is a propane sort of a thing, you know, hydrocarbon replacement. Those don't require quite as much in the way of retrofit, you know, to the hoses and all that. But R134 is going to require probably some hose changes and other things to keep the system tight. But yeah, when it's been no pressure in the system for a long time, you certainly need to change the receiver dryer and probably the orifice tube, and then also draw the system down with a vacuum for a while to dry everything out.
Yeah, so that was kind of my thought, is that if I, you know, have let it be unpressurized for so long, then, you know, if I have to change a bunch of stuff anyway, is it smartest to just go ahead with R134? But I had not heard of this carbon-based stuff, Red Tech.
Yeah, Houston and quite a few others, and I've used it a bit too. It's called Red Tech. That's its brand, and it's a material that can be introduced into systems that are either R12 based or R134 based. It kind of plays with everybody, and they have a bunch of different products that go along with it. You can have seal conditioners. You know, you introduce a little bit of seal conditioner chemical into the system, and some stop leak. They've got stop leak stuff that you can use in addition to their refrigerants. And so they've got a whole line of things to kind of maintain your system with.
Yeah, well, and that's, I guess, the original problem is that it leaked somewhere, and I don't know where that somewhere is. So if are stop leak products a good idea, or do they cause more problems later?
Probably not a great idea unless you're sure that it's a very, very super minor leak. But if it's a gross leak, then you need to find that. It's probably a ripped seal someplace.
Yeah, one of the things that I've experienced with dealing with a lot of old cars and air conditioning systems is all of the old rings on the original R12 cars, by the time they get 20, 30, 40 years old, they don't seal anymore. So anytime I'm doing a conversion on old cars these days, I open everything up, replace all the old rings, and then draw them down. And most of the time, I stick with 134A because it's just so readily available. But on the old cars where I have this leak, I try leak sealer or whatever. The problem is that the old rings have just died due to age.
All right, guys. Well, this has been a wonderful tech session, and this is definitely going to be one of the segments that we're going to release on YouTube in the near future. I think people will love to listen to this discussion later. So I think we'll have to end the tech session here. I'm going to play a short video promoting the upcoming Caravan to DeLorean Weekend here. Request of Ryan Foster here. So let me cue that up, and then we will jump into Chris Miles' presentation. So here we go.